Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we talk about issues affecting veterans after they get out of the military. Before we get started, I'd like to ask a favor. If you haven't done so already, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. If you've already done that, thank you. These ratings help the show get discovered so it can reach a wider audience. And while you're there, click the subscribe button so that you get notified of new episodes as soon as they come out. If you don't use Apple Podcasts, you can visit driveonpodcast.com/subscribe to find other ways of subscribing, including our email list. I'm your host, Scott DeLuzio, and now, let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, today my guest is Lonnie Hankins. Lonnie is the host of the Kruse Corner podcast and blog, where she discusses stories of interest to the military. Lonnie, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little about yourself and who you are, your military background, and things like that.
Well, first, thanks for having me.
Like
I said, my name's Lonnie Hankins, and I joined the Army when I was 22. I was in college working on an art degree, and people were telling me that wouldn't go anywhere. And so I started second guessing myself, and I got down to like that last semester, and I had family that had done military time, so I figured, I'll give it a try. And so I did the 4-year contract with the Army active duty, ended up switching over to the reserves for the last 2 years. So 6 total, served out of Fort Riley, Kansas, did 1 deployment with the 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry Regiment to Paktika Province, Afghanistan, and then was out of Fort Myers, Florida for the reserve end.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and so now you have you're the host of the Kruse Corner podcast, and your mission with that podcast and what you're doing over there, I think probably started off kind of similarly to how I started this podcast and why I started it. Could you tell us a little bit about the motivation behind the Kruse Corner and where the idea came from, to do what you're doing now?
So it originally started off just as a blog. It was something that I kind of started it because I was in my final year working on my master's degree, and you had to have a place to post your final research paper. And mine was on the VA. So I figured I'll just post it to my own blog, kind of a cheat thing, because I didn't want to have to ask anyone to put it on their stuff. And I didn't want to just have this one random research paper by itself on a website. So I kind of padded it with some writing I had been doing. And some of my friends saw it, and they're just like, you got to keep it going and stuff. And so the name came from my buddy Kruse, who I served with at the Quarter Cav, and he'd committed suicide my last month, I think it was, in active duty. And so I wanted to kind of do something as a homage to him a little bit. I had been struggling myself, and writing was kind of just my therapy. And then people started telling me they didn't like to read. So it turned into the podcast because people basically wanted me to read for them. So the podcast started off with me still doing the blog, but I was reading the articles basically for people. So it was like the audio Kindle version of my stuff. But I didn't realize until I went to school with civilians that people did not understand the veteran community and what was happening. And I got frustrated with it. And with the suicide epidemic going on, it was just like, how do you not know that 22 veterans kill themselves a day? How does nobody know this stuff? And I just needed a platform. And so that's really where it started, was I need to start talking about it and find people that will talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's my assessment was probably spot on there, because that's pretty much where I started with this podcast. Our platoon, we were in Afghanistan in 2010, and we didn't lose anybody overseas, but we started losing people after we came home, and that to me just was unacceptable. To think about that there's stuff being done. Obviously people know that there's a problem with suicide, amongst the military and veterans, in terms of people maybe in the VA or, other military circles. But the general public, like you said, doesn't really understand that, I don't think. Maybe there might be a better understanding now than there was maybe 10 years ago, but it's still a problem, and whatever is being done is just not enough.
Yeah.
Not in my opinion, anyways. And so that's where this podcast came from. It sounds like that's where kind of you got started off with yours, is to spread awareness, and that's really the name of the game to me, is to make more people aware of it and know that this is an actual problem. Um, and so there are people doing things. I don't want to make it sound like whatever the VA is doing or whatever other organizations are doing is not enough, or they're not actually trying anything that's working. I don't want to make it sound like that, but it's I do feel like there's more that needs to be done.
I do feel like there are a lot of organizations in the VA trying, but veterans are stubborn. And what I've found is there's resources that people won't use, and there's options to talk about things. And from having a podcast where I have it open to guests, like come tell your story, and it's hard to find people. And that was another part of the frustration, was you got to talk about it so people know, because if you don't, these civilians can't understand your experience if they don't know what that experience is. And if they're basing it off of like the movie Platoon or Black Hawk Down, like it's not going to get anyone anywhere, because then they think it's all combat, all crazy, and it's not always that. So
yeah, and it's not always combat related issues that cause some of the mental health problems that we experience in the military. There's people who have moral injuries, where they're in a position where they're doing things that they never really thought that they'd have to do. I've shared on this podcast before a time where I had to make a decision whether or not to shoot a child, and like that, even though I didn't end up shooting the child, it still is something that I carry around with me. It's never a situation I ever thought I'd have to be in.
Yeah.
And like that you carry with you, and people just don't really understand that these are things that the military, first responders, law enforcement, things like that have to carry these things around with them, and it's hard. So I applaud you for what you're doing in terms of trying to raise awareness for this type of stuff. And one of the other things that I've noticed recently going on, this is just actually within the last couple of days. We're recording now on June 19th, but within sometime during this last week. And just a disclaimer here, I don't get into politics on this show. I have my political beliefs, just like I'm sure everyone else does, but I don't want to alienate anyone who might be listening to the show, who might hear a political view that they don't agree with. And so I try to keep politics out of it. But with that said, I think we can probably all get behind a plan that was recently unveiled by President Trump, called the President's Roadmap to Empower Veterans and End a National Tragedy of Suicide, which is a mouthful. But I think they're trying to fit that into an acronym, PREVENT for short. It's basically a plan to raise awareness about mental health, connect vets to suicide prevention resources, things like that, to coordinate research into suicide. So have you heard about this plan at all, or what are your thoughts about it?
I've heard about it. I didn't really read into it a whole lot, because again, for me, just from doing things like the podcast, I realized that there are things that are already there. There's a lot that exists and people aren't utilizing it. And so I feel like you can keep adding programs, you can keep adding initiatives and all these things. You can make the acronym as long as you want, but veterans it can be a tough group, and a lot of people feel burned by the VA. And so it's this idea of like, do you care? Does anyone even want to listen? And then you still have to get through that mentality of you can't talk about it until you break that idea that we can't get out and talk about it and be open. Then I really don't feel like there's any program that's going to, I've used all of them. Like I've been all kinds of stuff, and there's still stuff I don't want to talk about it because I spent 6 years having it crammed down my throat. Don't talk about it or you're weak. And so It was always this conflict of, if I get help, I'm kind of showing that I'm not a soldier anymore. And so I think you have to get past that hump of showing people it's okay. Like mental illness, it's okay to not be okay. Like you can talk.
Exactly. Yeah. And what do you think is something that we could be doing a better job at to get people to that point where they are more open about it? I think it's probably we're in a better position now than we were 20 years ago, in terms of these conversations. But what do you think that people can do to try to
I'm always
help move
telling
this along?
people, I'm always telling people the biggest thing is within the veteran community because we understand each other the most. I know the VA does its hardest to get through to everybody, but there's a lot of us and there's a lot of overcrowding issues. And I've always told people if we could take some of that burden off the VA and start helping each other, we have to be able to talk to each other sometimes. And I've seen even just through social media that there's a lot of us that won't let each other talk. And we're kind of, it's again, that mentality of like, we're kind of policing each other up in the wrong way. And someone's showing weakness, it's like, don't do that. Like you're kind of ruining the uniform and the creeds and the oaths and all these things we talk about. We have to show each other that we got each other's back still. I think that's the biggest thing, is just showing that just because we took the uniform off, we're still here for each other. We're still battle buddies. I know that's cheesy, battle buddies for life, but there's a lot of truth to the bond that we have. It doesn't break as soon as you walk away. So I feel like we have to help each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are we actually looking out for each other? Are we, you know, calling each other up and, checking in to see how each other are doing, even something as simple as sending a text message every once in a while, or, just following up with people. And, even though you might have gotten out years ago, and I'm just as guilty as the next person about this, of not necessarily following up with all the people that I knew at one point, that I served with. But, we all, I think, could probably do a better job at reaching out to these people who, unfortunately, they tend to fall through the cracks in some of the institutions, the VA and other organizations that are out there trying to help. They might just fall through the cracks, or they stop going to their counseling sessions, or whatever the case may be. So following up with people and just reaching out, policing each other, trying to get this under control. I mean, I think we can do it. I think veterans and as a group, we're pretty intelligent, and we probably can figure this out, and we can get this done, given the right resources. But I think we just need to make a more focused effort on it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's even one of the things. A lot of times people getting out of the military, one of their struggles is they don't have a sense of purpose. Well, there you go. There's a sense of purpose right there.
Yeah.
Reach out to people. But as a society, generally speaking, not necessarily the military community, but as a society, people just don't understand the issues that we have, in the military. What do you think we could do to raise awareness there, to help people understand where we're coming from?
I mean, I think it's already happening. A lot of people, like you said, it's changed in the last 10 years. There's a lot more understanding around stuff, and people are opening up more. I think the civilian side of it is that they got to listen and kind of let go of the Hollywood idea of what service members are, and kind of let us tell our story. It's a big thing. Like Veterans Day would be a perfect time to like let veterans come out and talk about stuff. Like if we could create a full community effort in hearing the story of the actual average veteran instead of Hollywood's idea of it, I think it would make people feel like they could actually kind of help. I mean, I think a lot of, just from my friends, they don't know where to help. And a lot of them have this idea that I messed up because of combat or something. It's like, well, you went to Afghanistan, of course you're messed up. But it's like, but I'm not from that. Other things happen. Like, I'm a human at the end of the day. Regular things can happen to me.
Right.
And so I feel like it's breaking those stereotypes. It's breaking that stigma. And that's, across society, we have stigma attached to mental health. So we got to get past that.
Yeah.
And I think we're working on it.
Sure. Yeah. And I think so too. I think we are, doing a better job where people are opening up and talking more about mental health. It's definitely more acceptable to talk about mental health and to be getting treatment, as opposed to, even just like we said, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was a taboo thing. And if someone was going to, to a mental health treatment for something, whatever the case may be, it was like, oh my gosh, is that person crazy? Or they, like that was the mindset just a few years ago. And a lot has changed since then, which is, I think, a good thing, moving in that right direction. My wife and I, started watching the Sopranos not too long ago, and so that started late '90s or so, and one of the first episodes was when Tony Soprano is going into a mental health professional's office, and he's talking, and he's like, but you can't tell anyone about this because I don't want anyone to think I'm crazy or anything. And that is just a complete 180 from where we are now. I think maybe not exactly a 180. We still need to work to get there, but it's definitely a lot better than it was. So you talked a little bit about the name of your show and where that came from. Would you mind sharing a little information about who this was, who the show is named after, and talk a little bit about that, and maybe some of the struggles that kind of went on there?
So the podcast and the blog were named after Mark Kruse. It was a private that I served with at Quarter Cav at Fort Riley. Almost the entire 4 years I was there. He was one of our mechanics. I was a supply clerk and dispatch person, so I was in the PLL office. And so I was around the mechanics a lot, and he was just someone that was one of my buddies. There was kind of like this, we had our little clique, and I think the biggest time I realized that he was actually struggling was when we were in Afghanistan, because we were on guard duty a lot together, and those shifts are about 8 hours of your day, and it's just the two of you. So you have a lot of time to learn about each other, and it's stuff you wouldn't learn in small talk, because small talk gets old out there. And
Sure.
kind of just learned that he was kind of suppressing a lot of stuff. But again, it was that idea of like, it's the male soldier, can't talk about it. It's harder for them. And so I think as a female soldier, I experienced a lot more people opening up to me because I was seen as a safe spot to do that. I wasn't going to judge anybody. And I think we're seen a little bit more sensitive and motherly, I guess. He was pretty young. Like I said, I went in at 22. So by the time I was in Afghanistan, I was like 23, 24. And I think he came in probably around 18, 19. So he was young, and just kind of always came to me and stuff. And so when I found out he committed suicide, there was a part of me that wasn't surprised, but I felt like I let him down. It was my battle buddy. And I think the biggest thing was that because he had already left, he'd been out at least 6 months, I think, before he committed suicide. And I hadn't really kept up with him when he got out. And that's why buddy checks became a big thing to me, because it was like, what if I had called, or what if I had visited or something and made him feel like he was still connected to us and he didn't feel like he was by himself. And then there was also that idea of, did I say what I could? Was that everything? Is there anything I could have changed? And it took me 5 years probably to come to the conclusion that I couldn't have stopped it. Like it was pretty clear when I look back at Afghanistan, hindsight's always 20/20. You look back and you can tell it was somebody that was on that course. And I think his mind was made up long before it happened. But there was that idea of, you can't save everybody, but damn it, I mean, you're going to try. Like,
sure.
It's just part of kind of, it's like the whole thing with the combat doc. You're going to try to always do it, even if it's against regulation, it's against just the way the world works. You're going to try. And so he was a big inspiration, because I lost a lot of people to suicide, military and civilian, and his hit the hardest. So it was kind of like, this is how I can repay you, because I felt like I let you down in life. in death, I won't let you be forgotten, and I won't let anyone else be forgotten that goes that route. And let anybody talk bad about it, because there was still that idea of like, well, that's weak, that you quit is what a lot of people look at it as.
Right.
And I didn't want that to be what people that went that route were remembered as. I wanted the focus to be on the hurt and the invisible wounds and stuff. So that's why the podcast and the blog became such a big thing, because it really was a mission. It became my purpose, because I didn't have one. When I left, I was floating around. I didn't know what to do. And so for me, it was like, this is, you keep looking after battle buddies. It was a way to carry over what I knew how to do from the Army into my civilian life.
Yeah, and it's great that you're taking the time to continue this on and to talk about these things and help people out with the struggles that they're going through. But part of the reason why I asked the question that I did about where the name came from and everything is exactly what you just said is I feel like these people they had a story. They had a name, they had a story, they had they were human. They had their own issues that they were going through, and we should tell these stories and not treat them as quitters or whatever the case may be that some people might call it. Treat them as humans, the way that they should be, and have some compassion for the struggles that they're going through, and hopefully we can learn from this type of thing. And I think it's great that you're using this platform to share these stories. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the stories that you tell on the podcast and through the website?
So when I first started writing, it was mostly covering things like PTSD and suicidal ideation, that transition point, because I knew a lot of people were struggling with that. Kind of the POG side to deployment, to try to help people understand where your anxieties can come from, because dealing with the CAV unit, like you hear it all the time, like you have no reason to feel bad, but there's other stuff that goes on. So the stories became kind of like telling it from the side to show that anybody can be affected by a number of things. We had to get away from the combat story. And PTSD became a big story for me because I had it from domestic violence. And there was the side of people believing that I was trying to say that I had something from combat. I took a lot of slack from veterans that were like, well, nothing ever happened to you, so you can't talk about PTSD. And it's like, well, a lot can happen to you. So I knew I had to change that idea. But then there was also this idea of the people saying, well, you were a soldier, so how did you end up in domestic violence? I mean, couldn't you have fixed that? And so then it was that idea of like, okay, now obviously we have some skewed idea of what.
Yeah, because clearly you're a robot and you can now just, turn this on and turn it off and, go fight against whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Indestructible. So, nothing can happen. Real life things don't happen. And so I was trying to kind of humanize the soldier, because I mean, that's all I knew. I couldn't do it for any other branch, but I knew just as what the soldiers, kind of the stereotypical soldier to people was. And I wanted to humanize that a little bit and change kind of the dialogue we were having. And then once I did that, because the idea was I'm going to tell my side to walk the walk, to show you can talk about it. And then I started bringing guests on and letting other people tell their story, to get other branches, to get the man and the woman side of it, to get different MOSs, just to kind of have a more well-rounded spectrum of trauma and experience and stuff for my audience to hear, because I didn't want veterans just listening to these stories. I want civilians too, because I felt like you had to bridge that communication gap. And so really the stories are just, they range from all over, because I didn't want people to feel limited. It was just this idea of, you can come here and just talk and have conversation, and it's just you and me, and then other people listen later on. Mm-hmm. And so I've had stories of military sexual trauma, more domestic violence, the idea of being a spouse while you're whoever is deployed, or you left kids at home, or what it's like to be pregnant in the military and how you kind of catch stuff for that. Like the stories range all over the place.
I'm sure they do, and it sounds like there's a lot uh, to be peeled back here, and to actually talk about, and um, you know, to expose to the general public all of these things that go on that, you know, like you said, most people don't really understand. Their narrow view of the military is Black Hawk Down and Saving Private Ryan, and that's
Yeah.
like about the extent of it. You know, and that's definitely not the full picture. And you do have people who are, you know, parents who get deployed. I was a new parent when I was deployed, and we had a 2-month-old son when I was first in Afghanistan. It's like that wears on you too, and even though there's no combat involved, the day one that I stepped foot into Afghanistan, it still weared on me, because, you know, now I have a wife at home with a small child, and, you know, she's new at that too. It's not like
Yeah.
she's had any kids before either. And now I feel helpless because I can't help her out, you know, try to figure this thing out. And, you know, it's hard. There's a lot of things that go into it. And like you said before, we're all human, and we have human emotions, and we get affected by things just the same way that anyone else is. We're not those robots of soldiers that sometimes people think we are. So it's kind of terrible at times when people do think that of us, you know. I don't know.
Well, and then when they say like, where do we help? And it's like, I can't even tell you because there's so many different stories out there. It's like, how do you pinpoint where the suicide stemming from? Like it can come from so many different things. So the idea was I can only tell my story so much. And then
Yeah.
you have to get other people to tell it, because it can be so many things, and everybody's affected differently. Everybody has different ideas of trauma and what affected them and how they're healing from it or not. And so it's like, I can't pinpoint. So the idea was I got to get as many people from wherever I can find them. So we got a well-rounded idea of the type of stuff that's wrong.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And the more stories that you have, this, you know, I'm trying to do the same thing, you know, interviewing people, you know, like yourself, that you have your story, you know, other people have their stories, and, you know, trying to provide a well-rounded view of what actually occurs in the military community and the veteran community, so that people know what's going on, and maybe someone out there can figure something out to, you know, help some of these people who might be in some of these different situations that we talk about. Um, it has been a real pleasure speaking with you about all of this. I know we probably just scratched the surface, I think, with some of the stuff that we talked about. I think you know, we probably could go down a rabbit hole and
Oh
dig
yeah.
into a lot of this stuff pretty deep. But it has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm glad that you came on to the show um, to to share your stories, to share the story of some of the people that you've you know, interviewed on your show. Um, and I really do applaud you for the work that you're doing over on your podcast and your site. I really think it's a great thing that you're doing. Where can people go to find out more about you, your podcast, and everything you know, that you're up to?
So we're on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Kruse Corner, all one word. On Instagram, we're Kruse. It's KRUSE_corner. And then our website is just krusecorner.com. And
Okay.
really, you can find us on any of the main platforms: Spotify, Anchor, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So after you're done listening to this episode, you know, stop what you're doing, go over to the search box there and type in Kruse Corner, KRUSE Corner, and find that podcast, subscribe to it, you know, check it out. It's got listened to a few episodes already. You know, it's got a lot of good stuff that I've heard. So, you know, thank you again for sharing that with us, and for doing, you know, everything that you're doing. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes or learn more about the show, you can visit our website, driveonpodcast.com, or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Drive On Podcast.